This video is about how evaluation theorists design evaluations and practice their craft. And a craft it is, as we shall see. Greetings, I'm Michael Quinn Patton. This is the second of two videos reviewing the new third edition of Evaluation Roots by Marvin, Alkin, and Christina, Christie. In the first video, I reviewed the evolution of the evaluation theory tree over 2 decades. Over these last 20 years, I think it's fair to say that the evaluation theory tree, as portrayed in Evaluation Roots, has become the dominant paradigm for describing the variations in how different theorists approach the practice of evaluation. In this latest edition, the book reframes the evaluation theory tree from portraying theorists on different branches of the tree, the use branch, the methods branch, and the valuing branch, to positioning different theories on the use branch, methods branch, and valuing branch. In other words, the third edition transitions from portraying theorists to portraying theories. Despite that shift in emphasis, the book still includes 18 chapters written by theorists about how they practice evaluation. This video will use those chapters to examine how well the theory tree represents those practices. And indeed, I'll suggest, as I concluded at the end of the first video, that the theory tree, by placing theorists on only one branch, doesn't do justice to the integration of practice that includes all 3 branches, use, methods, and valuing. Indeed, I've suggested in the first video that the theory tree has been so influential that all theorists now attend to all 3 branches in their practice. And I want to look at the implications of that, as I've suggested that the theory tree is now no longer as useful as it originally was, because it doesn't capture the influence of the theory tree on evaluation theorists, and therefore doesn't depict the systems complexity of current evaluation practice, which incorporates all 3 branches. That was highlighted by examining how the question can be changed from the original theory tree question to a more systems-oriented question. We know that what questions we ask determine what answers we get. So here's a recap from the first video. The question on which the theory tree is based asks, for each theorist or theory, what is the main emphasis between methods valuing and use? And that question assumes that any theorist has a primary emphasis where one branch is addressed more than the others. On which branch of the theory tree, then, methods valuing or use, does the theory best fit? That is what gave rise to positioning theorists and now theories on the theory tree. But if you ask a different question, how does the theorist or theory conceptualize the relationship between methods valuing and use, you get a different approach. What is distinct about how a theory conceptualizes this interrelationship that makes it distinctive? And as I've suggested, theorists now address all 3 branches as well as other factors in their practice. And that's what we're going to delve into in this video. Asking the systems-oriented question of how each theorist incorporates valuing, methods, and use, as well as other factors within their practice, gives rise not to positioning a theorist on a single branch, but to a forest of distinct theoretical positions, each one of which addresses the interrelationship between values, valuing, methods, and use. And that's what we're going to explore. Chapter 23 of the new edition of Evaluation Roots presents theory prototypes of the various theories without reference to where they're positioned on the evaluation theory tree. And that is closer to the approach that we're going to take in this video, by examining specifically the way in which these theorists are addressing valuing, methods, and use within a more holistic, integrated evaluation practice. So this second video is about theorists in integrated practice, a complex systems perspective on theory influencing practice, illuminated by the theorist chapters in the third edition of Evaluation Roots. The emergent realist theory of Mel Mark and Gary Henry was not included in the original evaluation theory tree because it was such a comprehensive theory that they could not locate, that is, Marv Alkin and Tina Christie could not locate a priority. So they left the theory off. Then in their article on revisiting the evaluation theory tree, they decided that based upon additional evidence that the theory leaned more towards social science methods, social inquiry methods, and they placed the emergent realist theory on the methods branch. But when you read the article in the book, and if you know their work, it's premised on and directed towards social betterment, is hugely values-oriented, and is also, because of the emphasis on evaluation influence versus instrumental use, making a major contribution to how we think about the results of evaluation, how they're used, and how they're influenced. In the methods piece, they're clearly interested in methods that identify the mechanisms that bring about program results. But in fact, as Alkin and Christie originally concluded, it's a very comprehensive and integrated approach and ought to be presented in that way. It doesn't fit on one branch neatly. In introducing emergent realist evaluation in the new third edition, they note that this theory has expanded extensively into discussing evaluation influence, and therefore, by depicting different levels and types of evaluation use, has made a significant contribution to the use branch. But they conclude, quote, although it leans toward the valuing branch of the tree because of its emphasis on promoting social betterment, we place emergent realist evaluation on the methods branch because of its emphasis on the use of social science methods, close quote. And so we see here the struggle of answering the question, which single branch has the greatest emphasis in a theory? That problem goes away when we ask the question, how are the contributions of a theory interconnected and interrelated across the theory branches? As, for example, I would suggest in this summary, if we say emergent realist evaluation aiming for social betterment, the valuing function, what they call, quote, the guiding star for evaluation, close quote, by applying systematic research methods appropriate to specific context and evaluation purpose, the methods branch function, to inform and influence key stakeholders, the use function, that in this way we get a comprehensive integrated picture of the theory-practice connection and the way in which realist evaluation contributes to all three branches, draws on all three branches, and integrates that approach in its actual practice. I would make the same argument with regard to Carol Weiss. She's placed on the methods branch, in part because of her work on theory, but she had huge influence in evaluation use. She's deeply concerned about evaluation values and the values of stakeholders and policymakers. And to place her on one branch, I think, seriously underestimates her influence. The contributions of Carol Weiss offer an opportunity to emphasize the transition from the tree concept with its three branches, distinct, valuing, use, and methods, to a forest of distinct trees, each of which has a unique constellation of valuing, methods, and use, and an interaction among them. In that transition from the single tree and emphasis on a single tree to the forest of distinct trees, we get an evaluation theory practice ecological niche. Some call this the context for the evaluation. But context is a more static term to me than an ecological niche. Ecological niche evokes a complex, dynamic, living system. And that's what an evaluation niche is for the theory practice integration. My learning about that really began from Carol Weiss and what became known as the Weiss-Patton debate on evaluation, featured in Marv Alkin's edited volume on debates. At the American Evaluation Association National Conference in 1988 in Boston, Carol Weiss and I had consecutive day keynotes. Carol Weiss's keynote was about the challenges of getting evaluations used because of all the dynamic and challenging political factors that were faced. And my keynote was about the ways in which utilization-focused evaluation worked with primary intended users to get evaluations used. Carol was more pessimistic about instrumental use, direct use from evaluation findings. I was more hopeful about how that might happen. And so it became known as the Weiss-Patton debate. And when Marv Alkin assembled a group of people to talk about the status of evaluation, that was one of the issues we debated. The debate ended up coming down to the fact that we were operating in different ecological niches. Carol Weiss was operating in the national political environment of Congress, of major policy making, and a congressional national context. I was operating with small local nonprofits where there was a director, some board members, but a small number of identifiable people who could use an evaluation. We were operating in different ecological niches. We weren't really differing about the fundamentals, but we're bringing different experiential perspectives to bear based upon our experiences in these different environments. Trees occupy distinct ecological niches. I'm coming to you from northern Minnesota in the United States, among deciduous forests consisting of oaks, maples, pines of different varieties. And those trees make up a living ecological system. Evaluation trees also occur within an ecology of people, primary users, the program or intervention, society, economy, politics, culture, and that ecological system is a part of defining the unique characteristics across branches of any evaluation. Theorist Eleanor Chelimsky is located in the new third edition on the use branch under practical policy evaluation. She was the founder and director of the Government Accountability Office's Program Evaluation and Methodology Division between 1980 to 1994, a unit charged with doing evaluations for Congress and improving GAO's methodological capabilities. With 80 to 100 people working under her, this office had between 45 and 50 evaluations underway at any given time and produced 30 major reports annually. Under Eleanor Chelimsky's leadership, PEMD conducted over 300 evaluations of government policies and programs for Congress. The work included developing new methods for evaluation, like prospective evaluation. Her niche, then, was a highly political, high-stakes environment in which she took as her purpose, quote, telling the truth to the people who may not want to hear it at all is, after all, the chief purpose of evaluation. She wrote, use depends on credibility. The need to be methodologically credible is part and parcel of the evaluator's armamentarium. It is ingrained, a product of our training and our awareness, that the ultimate audience for our work will be other evaluators. The foundation of evaluation use is credibility then, not just information, but credible information. Whether the issue is fairness, balance, methodological quality, or accuracy, no effort to establish credibility is wasted. Credibility, and therefore utility, are affected by, quote, the steps we take to make our evaluative decisions, and also intellectually, in the effort we put forth to look at all sides and all stakeholders of an evaluation. Quote, the perception of impartiality is at least as important as methodological rigor in high political environments. She was a great advocate for evaluator independence. In her 2006 keynote at the American Evaluation Association annual conference, she regaled the audience with stories of dealing with the political machinations in getting the U.S. Congress to pay attention to important evaluation findings. She titled her presentation, A Clash of Cultures, Improving the Fit Between Evaluative Independence and Political Requirements of a Democratic Society. As such, independence was not just a commitment to use or a pathway to use, nor was it about methods. It was a fundamental value. And Eleanor Chelimsky, in the Evaluation Roots book, I think, is the only real representative of one of the most widespread forms of evaluation, independent evaluation offices. All United Nations agencies have independent evaluation offices. International agencies of all kinds, domestic units have independent evaluation offices, where the value is about the independence of judgment of evaluators. That's what's being protected above everything else. And so that valuing branch is really represented by the massive effort in infrastructure around the globe to make evaluators, ensure that evaluators are operating independently. Independence as valuing. She was also emphasized contextualizing. She said, I think that so long as we try to force-fit evaluation ideas into political or social milieu without understanding those milieu, we'll never get them in. Understanding the ecology of a particular evaluation. She shepherded the methodological developments in GAO, which concluded that strong evaluations employ methods of analysis that are appropriate to the question, support the answer with evidence, document the assumptions, procedures, and modes of analysis, and rule out the competing evidence. Strong studies pose questions clearly, address them appropriately, and draw inferences commensurate with the power of the design and the availability, validity, and reliability of the data. Strength should not be equated with complexity, nor should strength be equated with the degree of statistical manipulation of data, neither infatuation with complexity nor statistical incantation makes an evaluation stronger. The strength of evaluation is not defined by a particular method. Longitudinal, experiential, experimental, quasi-experimental, before and after, and case study evaluations can be either strong or weak. That is, the strength of an evaluation has to be judged within the context of the question, the time and cost constraints, the design, the technical adequacy of the data collection and analysis, and the presentation of the findings. A strong study is technically adequate and useful. In short, it is high in quality. This is a portrayal of flexible methods, of a theory about methodology that has to do with understanding the evaluation context, the ecological setting in which the evaluation takes place, and generating, adapting, and implementing methods appropriate to that context. In the book, Alkin and Christie note this methodological flexibility and say that they place her on the use branch because of the methodological flexibility, which doesn't fit for them the methods branch, which they determine is defined more narrowly by a particular adherence to a particular method, like randomized controlled trials or the theory-driven evaluation. And yet, here we have a case where methods are central to the credibility and utility and the valuing of independence of this work, where it's clear that Eleanor Chelimsky fits across the different pieces. Again, they say the flexibility of methodology is a major reason for our placing practical policy evaluation on the use branch rather than the methods branch. It seems clear to me that the place to place Eleanor Chelimsky and practical policy evaluation is across all the branches, and to look at, as she has described, the interdependence, the interrelationship, the interactions among use methods and valuing rather than any one particular approach. Marv Alkin's context-sensitive evaluation, placed on the use branch, is a welcome addition to the Evaluation Roots book and may be the ultimate test of influence across the three branches, since Marv Alkin's work draws heavily upon extensive research about use and is based upon the factors that the research has shown affects use, all of which relate to context. But context is clearly something that is appropriate across the branches. Context as a theory tells us that use will be contextual, methods will be contextual, valuing will be contextual. Alkin is very clear about his niche. It is small-scale, formative, and summative evaluations. And while he has pulled together extensive research about use, that includes an approach to valuing that is quite specific. He rejects the role of evaluators as valuing agents. Instead, he works with primary users to establish value systems for rendering judgments, which makes valuing a primary user activity that is also supported by having high technical quality as appropriate to the situation on the methods branch, which I would call a methodological contingency theory. Indeed, that's the same kind of methodological approach that, with flexibility and contextual appropriateness, that we saw in Eleanor Chelimsky's work at a national level. In essence, we learn more about how to enhance use through Marv Alkin's context-sensitive evaluation by incorporating not only his approach to use directly, but how he approaches valuing and how he approaches methodology to get high technical quality through contingency theory, which is basically a contextually based methodological approach. We'll turn now to look at a methods branch theory, randomized controlled trials, and see that even there, the influence of use and valuing has become prominent. But let me preface it by saying that the methods branch is quite narrowly conceived in the theory tree. It does primarily focus upon quantitative experimental methods and theory-driven evaluation. But there are other influential methodological theories, one of which we've just reviewed, which is contingency theory, which has become quite important. In contrast to the calls for the gold standard, representing randomized controlled trials, the platinum standard is methodological appropriateness. And that's the theory that ought to appear, it seems to me, on the methods branch. Just as we'll see later, the absence of qualitative theory on the methods branch is a real limitation. Egon Guba, for example, in reaction against quantitative experimental methods, developed the theory that when you're studying human beings, you should only use qualitative methods to get at the essence of humanity. These are methodological theories that are not in the methods branch. But let's look at one that is. Randomized controlled trials and the way in which, over the last 20 years, the theory of randomized controlled trials has incorporated other branches, both use and valuing. Beginning with the example of the niche of randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials work best where there's a clearly identified, standardized, carefully implemented program or intervention. Can the observed results of the program be attributed to the program? Randomized controlled trials address that question. Here perhaps is the ultimate test of the perspective I'm offering. Robert Baruch, clearly from the very beginning, has been the epitome of randomized field experience on the evaluation theory tree. In the latest edition, with his colleague Herbert Turner, they write about randomized field experiments. And what they say is that for a preconditions of an RCT, randomized controlled trial, is that it studies a serious social problem, the effect of a purported solution is unclear, methods other than RCTs are inadequate, ethical and legal standards can be met, and evidence from the RCT will be used. Studying a serious social problem has valuing dimensions to it. Concern that the evidence will be used clearly is a use framework, and they wrap that around the methods piece. Indeed, their theory of evaluation impact is that evaluations are more likely to be valued by policymakers and more likely to be used if they use what are considered rigorous quantitative experimental methods. And so use and valuing are very much connected to their methodological approach. An excellent example of what I'm talking about is illustrated in the New Directions volume that Tina Christie and Marv Alkin edited on theorist models in action. They ask 4 of the theorists on the theory tree, selected by their different branches, to examine how they would approach a program entitled Women Affirming Motherhood Program. The 4 theorists were Bob Baruch, Ernie House, Michael Scriven, and myself, with Bob Baruch representing the methods branch, House and Scriven representing different directions on the valuing branch, and I represented the use branch. And what you find in that volume is that all 4 of the theorists are dealing with use, methods, and valuing, asking questions about what's appropriate, figuring out who the intended users are, what values would inform the design of the evaluation and the interpretation of the results. All 4 theorists are engaging in the interaction of use, valuing, and methods. And I urge folks to take a look at that excellent volume and see how theorists in action, in practice, integrate use, valuing, and methods, not prioritizing one without including the relationships with the others. But the emphasis on the methods branch from the beginning in the theorists that were chosen and now the theories that are emphasized is to buy into the notion that quantitative experimental methods are the most rigorous approach to evaluation and treats the qualitative work that was done by, for example, Guba and Lincoln as part of the valuing branch rather than as the methodological branch. The important work of Yvonna Lincoln and Egon Guba on naturalistic inquiry doesn't get the attention it deserves on the methods branch, especially because it was specifically a reaction to the dominance of the experimental paradigm in evaluation. Yvonna Lincoln became president of the American Evaluation Association in 1990 and devoted her presidential address to the importance and legitimacy and rigor of qualitative evaluation. She went on to edit the Handbook of Qualitative Research with Norman Denson, which includes major chapters on qualitative inquiry. If instead of putting fourth-generation evaluation on one branch, we look at it as an integrated approach, cutting across and influencing all three branches, then the description would go like this. Fourth-generation evaluation facilitates diverse stakeholders to determine what is valuable and meaningful, the valuing function, using qualitative methods to generate in-depth perspectives, the methods function, that enable understanding and valuing each other's perspectives in order to decide individually and together what actions are appropriate, the use function, all based on their values and the socially constructed perspectives they have generated and examined. That is an example of a holistic approach to fourth-generation evaluation rather than attributing a priority to the valuing branch. Likewise, it puts Bob Stake on the valuing branch because of his work in responsive evaluation, which is fundamentally about qualitative inquiry, and omits then from the methods branch his important work in case study evaluation. In his chapter in the book, he talks about valuing as a shared human experience, a personal experience that evaluation formalizes, and that responsiveness to the people in the program, their values, those affected by the program, their concerns and interests, and that leads the evaluator to select contextually appropriate methods and independently render judgments about whether the evaluand works, whether it's good, which is a value judgment, but one arrived at through evidence, especially in-depth qualitative evidence that allows to highlight the particularities of the situation. And his chapter includes a section on utility, in which he discusses evaluations being useful as a critical quality criterion for evaluation. His chapter then illustrates how his practice cuts across all three branches, which Alkin and Christie acknowledge in their chapter introducing the theorists. They say about Bob Stake, we have placed him on the valuing branch, quote, acknowledging its substantial influence on theories across the tree, period, close quote. This holistic, integrated approach to looking at practice elevates those three branches into a systematic look at practice informed by valuing methods and use, rather than establishing one as a particular priority. And Bob Stake's work and practice, in my judgment, epitomizes that practice theory holistic integrated connection. I would summarize responsive evaluation in an integrated sense, then, as rooted in the human personal experience of valuing, which responsive evaluation formalizes by being attentive and responsive to programs, evaluands, and the people in and affected by programs by learning about, acknowledging, and addressing their values, the valuing function, then independently assessing achievement of desired criteria of goodness through situationally appropriate methods, including case studies that spotlight the particularities and humanity of people and context, the methods function, and meets evaluation's quality standard of utility contextually and responsively. Tom Cook, featured on the methods branch as an experimental researcher, said in a keynote address to the International Evaluation Conference in Vancouver in 1995, quote, qualitative researchers have won the qualitative-quantitative debate. What did he mean by won? He meant they had won legitimacy, that qualitative methods had demonstrated epistemologically and ontologically value in evaluation. He still advocated to get an attribution through quantitative experimental methods, but for evaluation general, with the range of evaluation questions that are asked, qualitative methods had legitimacy. But qualitative and mixed methods do not appear to have legitimacy on the evaluation theory tree on the methods branch, because those approaches are absent from the theory tree. I've already discussed some of the controversies about placement on the valuing branch. Let me offer yet another example from the article on culturally responsive evaluation. Culturally responsive evaluation is placed on the valuing branch. But here's Rodney Hopson describing how culturally responsive evaluation approaches the entire evaluation process, including everything from question formulation to collection and interpretation of data. And I think as you listen to his going through that overall approach, you see the integration of use, values, and methods. Have a look.
Put together a spiral visual that complements that work. And so what we do is we suggest that from the stages of those 9 stages of evaluation that are presented in that user-friendly guide that Fryson et al. Depict, from identifying attention to stakeholders to dissemination, that culture should be at the center of that. Culture shouldn't simply be positioned as just a way of understanding a particular group of people in one context, right? Somewhat separate from the actual system and practice of evaluation. And that part of what we do in the context of evaluation, when we attend to stakeholders and we form questions and so forth up to dissemination and reporting of our results, is we should be paying attention to issues of culture through all those 9 stages.
So I hope you see there the way in which culturally responsive evaluation is a comprehensive approach that includes valuing whatever is important within a cultural context and wrapping that around everything from the questions that are asked, the methods that are used, the follow-through to dissemination and use, that it's a fully integrated approach, not just one priority. The subtitle of the chapter on culturally responsive evaluation is Critical and Liberatory Roots, which brings forward a purpose for evaluation that goes beyond use to making evaluation part of changing society. It has a role in addressing racism, in attacking structural racism, and in liberating, defined in the chapter as liberation lies in defining in our languages the structural relations undergirding our work in the academy and in the world that we study and evaluate for ourselves, based on our own logics and values, with and for the people with whom we are mutually accountable, without fear of punishment and at no one else's mercy. This purpose of evaluation is beyond the use, methods, and valuing branches, viewing the evaluation as having a goal of contributing to liberation. This is in keeping with the culturally responsive indigenous evaluation chapter, which also positions itself within the larger global indigenous evaluation movement, which includes efforts on decolonizing evaluation and seeing the historical roots of evaluation that have contributed to inequalities. Using evaluation to support and propel social change is central to 2 other evaluation theories on the valuing branch. Jean Dean Coffey's work on equitable evaluation, which calls for all evaluations to address equity, and the work of Donna Mertens on transformative evaluation, which aims to foster increased respect for human rights and achievements of social, economic, and environmental justice. And so this additional role for evaluation as part of a comprehensive evaluation practice isn't adequately captured on the valuing branch because it involves more activism and change-making initiatives than the act of valuing itself. By now, you surely get the point that evaluators in practice work across all three branches of the theory tree, and that to locate a theorist on only one branch doesn't do justice to the complex, systems-oriented nature of evaluation practice influenced by the theory tree. I'm not going to go through all of the theorists in the Evaluation Roots book to make this point further. It would become redundant. But I would be remiss if I didn't include and close with one more evaluation example. Perhaps you've heard of it. Utilization-focused evaluation, to which I turn in closing. Utilization-focused evaluation has evolved in this transformative direction, especially propelled by the engagement with my daughter, evaluation partner, and co-author of Utilization-Focused Evaluation's new 5th edition. As an intergenerational team, we bring to the new 5th edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation developments in the larger world over the last decade, including climate change and issues around equity. Charmaine is especially interested in using evaluation for systems change, this new direction for evaluation, and the new book edition reflects that emphasis. And the new edition of Utilization-Focused Evaluation, featured on the use branch of the theory tree, has moved from specifying steps for evaluation to principles for utilization-focused evaluation. And those principles then constitute an adaptive niche for utilization-focused evaluation for any situation in which there are opportunities to use evaluation to support both decision-making and systems change. So that from the last decade in particular, as developmental evaluation, principles-focused evaluation, and now blue marble evaluation, which is specifically aimed at global systems change, has merged into an umbrella of utilization-focused evaluation to engage in principles-focused developmental and blue marble evaluation. The valuing emphasis that has taken on greater importance with utilization-focused evaluation in the last decade is stimulated by developments in the larger world. The global pandemic. The pandemic made even more transparent the extent of health disparities globally and deepened those disparities, even as the climate emergency deepened, and we became more and more aware that we're on a short timeline for dealing with issues of climate change, climate mitigation, in the midst of an increase of misinformation, of polarization around what the facts are, what the solutions are, what the issues are, and what values ought to guide solutions. At the same time, George Floyd was murdered here in Minnesota, where Charmaine and I live, and the Black Lives Matters movement and social justice movement worldwide was reignited and accelerated. And so together, these crises come together into creating a post-normal world that we're not going to go back to business as usual. It's what's being called a polycrisis, multiple overlapping crises. And that is what's leading to this clarion call for transformation of systems and the call for all hands to be on deck, including evaluators. The International Development Evaluation Association adopted a mandate for all evaluations to make sustainability a criterion in evaluations, just as the Equitable Evaluation Initiative is calling for all evaluations to address equity. And Blue Marble Evaluation incorporates both of those mandates to make evaluation a contribution to systems change. In keeping with the guiding principle adopted by the American Evaluation Association, that evaluators ought to serve the common good and equity, and calls on evaluators to strive to contribute to the common good and advancement of an equitable and just society. On the methods branch, utilization-focused evaluation takes a contingency approach, flexible methods, appropriate methods to whatever the situation, context, and evaluation questions are, but it's also the case that it was utilization-focused evaluation that propelled my work in qualitative methods. The work that I've done in 4 editions of qualitative research and evaluation methods has been utilization-focused in its methodological emphasis and has contributed to and affected the work in utilization-focused evaluation. Indeed, I've done more workshops and more people have adopted the qualitative research book than have adopted utilization-focused evaluation. And so the influence there is very much interactive and interdependent between qualitative evaluation perspectives, utilization-focused evaluation perspectives as informing each other and mutually interactive. I've come to see utilization-focused evaluation in practice as having implications and action across all 3 branches. This video has been looking at the theory-practice connection as illuminated by the theorists featured in the Evaluation Roots new 3rd edition. We've looked at the tree concept and the way in which the theorists presented in Evaluation Roots are allocated to a primary branch, use, methods, or valuing. And in examining, in the first video, the evolution of the evaluation theory tree over 2 decades, have suggested that it is time to move from allocating the theorists to a particular branch to looking at how their practice engages all the branches. And so the question that I've been posing for the theory tree in this video is, the theory tree works in theory, but does it work in practice? And I've suggested that the actual practice of theorists is more illuminated by looking at how they engage with all 3 branches of the theory tree, use, methods, and valuing, rather than looking at a dominant emphasis on a single branch. We are at a moment then of a paradigm shift. The theory tree has been a dominant, I think the dominant paradigm over the last 2 decades for illuminating the distribution of theorists across the different branches of the theory tree. But a new paradigm emerges when new questions arise that the dominant paradigm does not adequately answer. And that's the situation that we face now. We're asking different questions. The dominant question of the theory tree is for each theorist or theory, what is the main emphasis between methods, valuing, and use? On which branch of the theory tree, methods, valuing, or use, does the theory best fit? And that gave us the theory tree. But if we ask, how does the theorist or theory conceptualize the relationship between methods, valuing, and use, then, and we ask what is distinct about how a theory conceptualizes this interrelationship that makes it distinctive, we end up with a forest of distinct theories, each of which has a particular relationship between use, valuing, methods, and other factors. And so that constitutes what it seems to me is a paradigm shift in thinking about the relationship between theory and practice. Marv Alkin and Christie have done this field a tremendous service by bringing to our attention the importance of examining in depth the theory-practice connection. And in their chapter on theory prototypes, they begin to portray what a theory forest would look like. And I've suggested that an ecological systems approach to the theory forest will give us an even greater depth of understanding of how theorists actually practice, bringing systems and complexity concepts into our understanding of the theory-practice connection. And so the freestanding theory tree gives way to the dynamic living system of a ecological forest where theories in practice in the real world reflect the interrelationships among use, values, and methods. This is in keeping with what we're learning about the real world of forests and trees, for it turns out that roots do more than support a single tree. Trees and forests communicate with each other through their roots, through the ground, through fungi, through a complex dynamic living system. Trees communicate with each other. Knowing our evaluation roots helps us understand both our particular approaches to evaluation, but communicate together in the forest of evaluation. For evaluation to contribute to facing the global problems we face as humanity and as a planet, we will need to be able to communicate and connect theory and practice at an ecoforest level.